Welcome back to the Dynasty Rewind YouTube channel. My name is Bob Van, the IDP Man, and today I'm bringing you my top 5 rookie linebackers. We're going to get into that right now. So starting off with rookie linebacker number 5, and that's Nick Bolton, now a Kansas City Chief. Nick Bolton was a second-round pick, just like Willie Gay was last year. And what concerns me about that is the fact that they didn't really use Willie Gay, not in a large capacity. So I'm wondering if that's going to be the same case for Nick Bolton this year. However, I will say that the linebacker room's kind of opened up. They don't have the same vets that were there last year. They have a lot more opportunity at the position where he can get on the field right away. Plus, I don't think he needs as much development in coverage and such like that. I think he's more ready to play now. But I am still concerned. They kind of babied Willie Gay last year. Concerned they'll do it again with Nick Bolton. When you look at Nick Bolton's college production, he was fairly solid. Pretty strong tackler, not a lot of sacks to his name, interceptions, only 2 as a starter. Then what actually does jump off the page quite a bit is his pass defense. He had 12 the last 2 years, shows that he really stepped up in coverage, and he was able to, deflect passes and defend routes. So I think there's a good chance that him and Willie Gay can both start. Willie Gay will be more of the thumping run stopper, whereas Nick Bolton will kind of do some of that, but he'll be more of the coverage guy. He has a lot more speed than Willie Gay does, a lot more shifty, a lot more, the open hips to get from sideline to sideline, change direction and stuff like that in coverage. So as I mentioned before, my biggest concern is that I'm just worried this coaching staff is just going to baby him along and not let him jump into things right away, similar to they did with Willie Gay last year. However, like I mentioned, the opportunity is there a little more than it was last year for Willie Gay. Moving on to number 4, and that is Jeremiah Usu Coramoa, now a Cleveland Brown linebacker. JOK, more easily referred to as, he was one of my favorite linebacker prospects this season. He was actually my linebacker 2 coming into the draft. But when you look at draft capital, how things shake out, you do have to make adjustments. What I loved about JOK, he was the best coverage linebacker in the class, in my opinion. He was a playmaker on all levels of the ball, in the air, run stopping, pass rushing even. He made a big impact on every play. He was one of those guys that went out there and could basically let Notre Dame run whatever defense they wanted because they knew that JOK was so strong in his position where he could cover a tight end, he could cover a slot wide receiver, he could go out and cover a wide receiver itself, and he could be trusted in that position. So now you're thinking, well, why wasn't he drafted in the first round? He wasn't taken into the late second round. It was later discovered in his medical checkup that a heart condition was found. Nothing that seems too dire or crazy, similar to Montez Sweat a few years back where his stock plummeted. He was looked at in the top of the first and ended up being taken at the end of the first. So unfortunately, his stock falls into the second round. However, the Cleveland Browns, who honestly, let's be frank, needed some help in the linebacker room, get that and so much more with JOK. Now you can argue it's a crowded linebacker room. They only added Anthony Walker last year. They still have BJ Goodson there and a couple other odds and ends, Mac Wilson, a bunch of players I'm not really too thrilled about or expect much impact from. But JOK already is turning heads at camp. Now new teammate Anthony Walker, formerly of the Colts, has referred to JOK, saying that he reminds him a lot of Darius Leonard, which I would say is pretty high praise coming from that guy. So do yourselves a favor, get JOK on every roster. He's number 4, but he's number 2 in my heart. Moving on to number 3. That'll be Jamin Davis, now a member of the Washington football team. I was one of the ones pushing back on Jamin Davis in the pre-draft process. I wasn't wowed by his film. I wasn't impressed at a crazy level by any stretch. When I looked at his film, he had some plays, sure, he popped off and looked great, but there were others where I was just left unimpressed, and he looked like a player who still needed to develop a lot. Something of note with Jamin Davis is that he played for 3 seasons in college. It took 2 seasons to get a starting role in that Kentucky defense. From my record, there's no middle linebacker or off-ball linebacker that came out of Kentucky anytime recently. But so to me, that sparks a red flag because why couldn't he get that role earlier and why couldn't he sustain it? Then you look at his college production. Obviously, he only had the 1 year of college production, and it was pretty good. I'm not going to sit here and say it was bad or anything like that. The one thing of note, again, kind of picking him apart, something I got to do, is when you look at a player and he has more assisted tackles versus solo tackles, that's a bit of a red flag for me. It's a concern solely because of the fact of, A, if you can get more solo tackles than assists, that usually means, 1, you're getting the ball first, and then number 2, you can tackle guys on your own. So when you have more assists than solos, it usually means either A, you're the last guy to the ball, or you need help bringing guys down. One of the two is usually the culprit, and that's not great for a linebacker in the NFL, at least for scoring purposes. So again, I don't want to pick the guy apart too much. He's number 3. I'm not saying you should go draft him. The draft capital is huge. I do think he can be developed. Ron Rivera is a good developing head coach. So I'd say he has a good chance to thrive in the NFL. But one-year starters on defense usually take a bit to really hit their stride. Sometimes they just don't, and they get moved on from. So speaking of moving on, we're moving on to number 2. My number 2 linebacker prospect for this year is Ben Collins, now an Arizona Cardinals linebacker. So unfortunately, the first thing I have to touch on is that he was arrested for speeding not too long ago, going 76 in a 35 zone. Not a great look for a rookie linebacker. I don't think this itself will have any implications to this season. Even no suspension has been set out yet. No fine has been laid out yet. So it's more of a case of, is this a trend that's going to continue? I don't think so. It could be one of those unfortunate situations where this does become a habit or a trend. I hope it's not. I don't think it will. Nothing indicates that to me yet. So that's not affecting my draft stock. I just picked him up in a league, so I'm not overly concerned about that. Now diving into some of the good stuff about Zaven Collins. I do think that he's a fairly good linebacker. I didn't love his Mike stuff in college. I liked him a lot more when he was lined up on the edge, outside, take your pick. I didn't like him at Mike solely because I felt like sometimes he just wasn't in the play. It seemed like it took a while to digest things. But all in all, I will say that when he sees something and he goes and gets it. He's like a shark. That was, the thing that kept coming to my mind was that he's a shark out there where he may take a minute to see it, but when he does, so the one thing I noticed when he was in coverage at the Mike position, it seemed like, especially in zone, he was trying to digest too much at once. Again, just that play recognition just kind of coming into play where he's trying to see a little too much, can't digest it all right away. That is something that could come to him at the NFL level, especially with more training, better training from head coaches in the NFL, training from defensive coordinators in the NFL, as opposed to, defensive coordinators at a small college. The guy has a ton of college reps under his belt, unlike who we just talked about, John Davis. The fact of the matter is he has a lot more of a well of knowledge. Hopefully you would expect that play rec to come to him eventually, but it's one of those things you never know. Part of the reason why he gets so high on this list is that he was already labeled the starting Mike linebacker in place of Jordan Hicks. Jordan Hicks has been allowed to see a trade. He's done. He's out of town. He's done with. So there's no concerns there of him somehow regaining a role or anything like that. So for me, it's hard. I don't love Zaven Collins as a prospect. I think you can acknowledge that. But his college production was there. His college production was solid. He was a playmaker, to say the least. You do have to take into consideration that it was a smaller school. The level of talent he was playing around, not usually great. But all in all, he's linebacker 2. And moving on to number 1. So moving on to my number 1 rookie linebacker, and that's Micah Parsons, now a Dallas Cowboy linebacker. This is one of those picks. He was my linebacker 1 heading into the draft process, and I just felt he was so good that he really couldn't lose wherever he went. I felt that wherever he was going to go, he would be fine. He'd find a home. He'd get used and utilized well. And then, of course, I was tested with that because he ends up going to the Cowboys, who already have 2 stud linebackers and haven't really had room for a great third linebacker to add to the mix. So with that crowded linebacker room, I'm curious to see where he fits in, if anybody gets squeezed out. A lot of people are concerned that it's going to be Jalen Smith that is out the door. I don't see that being the case. I think Jalen Smith is fine. I think if anybody is squeezed out, it's going to be Leighton Vander Esch, and the reason for that is going to be his injury concerns. Hasn't been able to stay healthy the last 2 seasons. That's obviously concerning. You want guys that can stay on the field. The Dallas Cowboys have had a terrible defense because their defense can't stay healthy. The other thing why I'm not really concerned about Parsons is he's very versatile as a linebacker, and that is a very underrated part of his game. The one thing I will note is that I did hear a lot of the hype about him being the next Luke Kuechly earlier in the draft process. I think a lot of that's faded away now. I don't see him as that. I think he's a really good prospect. I actually copped into Tremaine Edmonds, now a Buffalo linebacker. So I don't think Parsons is necessarily going to set the world on fire and be the next elite linebacker you need on your teams. But I do think he is somebody you can trust in your draft, regardless of the fact that it is a crowded linebacker room. I think the thing is that he can line up kind of on the edge. He can blitz. He can rush. He can drop into coverage. His coverage is an underrated part of his game. I don't think he's elite in coverage by any stretch, but I do think he's better than people think. And then as a rusher, this dude is insane. I would say that he's arguably the best pass rushing linebacker in this class. Going back to his high school days when he actually declared to Penn State he was going to be an edge rusher. They moved him to off-ball linebacker, but he's always seen himself as an edge rusher. As a bonus for making it this far in the video, I'm going to drop my favorite rookie linebacker sleeper, and that's Ernest Jones, now a linebacker on the Los Angeles Rams. Now, what do I love about Ernest Jones? Simply put, you look at his college production, it jumps right off the page at you. He was an elite in pretty much every production category. Then you take into account the fact that the Rams drafted him the highest they've ever drafted a linebacker since Alec Ogletree 8 years ago. On top of that, Ernest Jones was a leader on his defense in college. He was a captain for the last 2 seasons. High producer, high energy motor guy, a guy who brings a new element to a defense. Then you take into consideration what linebackers they already have, which is Troy Reeder and Micah Kaiser. Last season, Micah Kaiser started out as the starting linebacker, got injured. Troy Reeder stepped in, basically filled the hole, no problem. So much so that Micah Kaiser came back healthy in the offseason, and Troy Reeder kept the job. Neither of these guys were drafted highly. Micah Kaiser was a 5th-round draft pick. Troy Reeder was actually undrafted. So when you think about the level of investment put into these guys, Ernest Jones takes the cake. Thanks so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. Please leave a like if you did. If you did enjoy, please check out these other videos for my IDP work here at Dynasty Rewind. Let me know down in the comments below if any of your favorite linebackers did not make this list, and I'll get to them as they come in. That's it from me today. Y'all have a good one.